The restaurant was dressed in gold and white, like a celebration meant to impress more than to feel. Soft music floated through the air, blending with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. At the center of it all sat her father, straight-backed and proud, wearing a suit that looked heavier with years of authority than age. It was his retirement dinner. A lifetime of work, of decisions that shaped others, of sacrifices he never stopped reminding people about. Friends, colleagues, distant relatives, everyone had come. Everyone, it seemed, except the version of him that had once been a father. She sat near the end of the long table, hands folded neatly in her lap. She had chosen a simple dress, nothing flashy. She never liked drawing attention to herself. Years of learning when to speak and when to stay quiet had taught her that blending in was safer. Across the table, her siblings laughed easily, soaking in praise and warm glances. They had always known how to belong here. She felt like a guest at her own family's table. The server refilled glasses. The music faded. Her father stood, lifting his glass high. The room hushed instantly, as if everyone had been waiting for this moment. "I want to thank you all," he began, smiling broadly. "Today marks the end of a long journey. I've worked hard my entire life, and I'm proud of what I built." Applause rippled around the room. He continued, voice confident, practiced. "And I've learned something important along the way." He paused, letting the silence grow. "Only the children who made me proud are truly mine." The words landed softly, but cut deeply. Laughter followed. More applause. Some people nodded, as if it were a wise, admirable statement. Her chest tightened. She stared down at the tablecloth, the delicate pattern blurring slightly. She told herself to breathe. She had survived worse than words. Then she felt it, that shift in the air. The moment before a storm. Her father turned his head. His eyes found her. "You," he said, his voice suddenly colder. "You can leave." The room froze. For a heartbeat, no one reacted. Then someone chuckled nervously. Others avoided looking at her. A few stared openly, curiosity winning over discomfort. She felt every memory rush back at once, every time she was overlooked, every time her efforts were ignored, every time love felt like something she had to earn. Slowly, she pushed her chair back. The sound echoed louder than she expected. She stood, smoothing her dress, her movements careful and composed. Inside, her heart pounded violently, but her face revealed nothing. She had learned long ago that showing hurt only made it easier for others to dismiss you. She did not look at her father. She did not look at the guests. She looked straight ahead. Then another chair moved. Sharp. Defiant. Her husband stood beside her. Not hurried. Not angry. Just steady. She felt his presence before she felt his hand gently brush against hers. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The room's attention shifted instantly, confusion spreading like a whisper. Her father frowned. This was not part of his plan. She had been told to leave quietly. But she was no longer standing alone. And for the first time that night, the silence didn't belong to her, it belonged to everyone else. She had learned early how to disappear. Not in the physical sense, she was always present, always available, but in the way that mattered. She learned how to shrink her needs, soften her voice, and lower her expectations until they fit comfortably beneath everyone else's. As a child, she was praised for being easy. Easy meant she didn't complain. Easy meant she understood when attention went elsewhere. Easy meant she accepted silence as love. Her siblings were loud and bright, full of dreams their father proudly repeated to anyone who would listen. Their achievements were announced, framed, celebrated. Mistakes were brushed away with reassurance and second chances. For her, the rules were different. When she succeeded, it was expected. When she failed, it was remembered. She remembered staying up late at the kitchen table, textbooks spread out under a single dim light, while the rest of the house slept. She remembered working part-time jobs before she was old enough to complain about exhaustion, slipping envelopes of cash into her mother's purse without saying a word. No one asked where the money came from. When her mother fell ill, the house shifted into quiet panic. Doctor's appointments, medications, long nights filled with whispered pain, she was there for all of it. She learned how to measure doses, how to recognize warning signs, how to be strong when fear threatened to spill over. Her siblings visited when they could. She stayed. Her father thanked her once. Briefly. Then moved on. Love, she learned, was something you proved through usefulness. College came with scholarships she fought for alone. While others were celebrated for being naturally talented, she was told she was lucky. She paid what she could herself, refusing to ask for help she knew would come with conditions. She never told anyone how tired she was. When she fell in love, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and steady, like finding warmth after years of cold. Her husband listened in ways no one ever had. He noticed how she flinched at raised voices, how she apologized for things that weren't her fault. He never tried to compete with her past. He simply stood beside her. Her father disapproved of the marriage. There was no grand argument, just distance. Cold looks. Silence. A refusal to attend moments that mattered. She told herself it didn't hurt. But pain has a way of collecting interest. Even after she married, she sent money home when things were tight. Helped when asked. Stayed invisible when not. She believed that if she gave enough, someday she would be seen. That night at the retirement dinner, as she stood at the edge of the table, every sacrifice replayed in her mind like a quiet confession no one had ever heard. She realized something then, something heavy, something freeing. She had built herself without applause. She had survived without permission. And the strength her father dismissed had carried more weight than his approval ever could. She didn't know yet what her husband was about to say. But for the first time in her life, she stopped wondering what she had done wrong. She had done more than enough. Her husband didn't raise his voice. He didn't storm forward. He didn't shout, and yet the room seemed to shrink around them both, as if the air itself were holding its breath. People had always assumed power came in volume, in flamboyance, in domination. But here he was, calm, deliberate, unshakable, and everyone noticed. He lifted his glass slowly, giving the polished crystal a soft gleam under the chandelier's light. Then, with a glance that swept across every familiar face in the room, he spoke. His voice was low, measured, carrying the weight of every truth that had been ignored for far too long. Before she leaves, he said, placing his hand gently over hers, there's something everyone here should understand. The room tilted, all eyes snapping toward them. Murmurs started, but he didn't flinch. This woman, he continued, has spent her life quietly giving more than anyone here could have asked for. Her father's smile faltered. He leaned slightly forward, as if trying to anticipate the next words. She paid for her own education, worked through nights that would have broken others, and sent money home when no one else would. She carried burdens quietly, she stayed when it was easier to walk away, and she cared for those who depended on her without expecting recognition. A whisper ran through the guests. Heads turned. Eyebrows lifted. She saw the recognition flicker in the eyes of a few people who had never looked at her twice before. Her father's jaw tightened. The pause stretched, heavy and suffocating. And the company you are retiring from, her husband added, his gaze sharp but calm. 10 years ago, when it was on the brink of collapse, it wasn't a bailout from your investors that saved it. It was her. An anonymous loan she made with her own savings. No one knew. She never asked for credit. She only wanted to help. The air was electric. The sound of a dropped fork somewhere in the back echoed unnaturally loud. The whispers had become audible, a cascade of shock and disbelief. Her father's hand gripped the glass harder than necessary. For the first time in decades, he seemed small, reduced by the truth that had always been there, but ignored. Her husband's words weren't loud, but they hit harder than any accusation ever could. They didn't scream anger or revenge, they simply reflected reality, and reality has a way of humbling even the proudest. She has never sought approval, he said finally, eyes steady on her father. She has never asked to be praised or noticed. And yet, she has built more, given more, and loved more than any of us here. A hush settled over the room. Her siblings looked at her differently, some with shame, some with awe. Friends and colleagues exchanged glances, realizing they had overlooked the woman who had quietly held everything together. Her father's glass wobbled. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, searching for a response that wouldn't come. She felt the old tension lift slightly, replaced with something warmer, something that had nothing to do with their recognition. For once, she realized that her worth was not defined by applause. Not by approval. Not even by her father's conditional love. The silence that had haunted her for years was finally broken, not by her words, not by her tears, but by the unwavering truth spoken beside her, and the man who believed in her when no one else did. And for the first time that evening, she felt the shift. The balance had changed. She had been overlooked for too long, but now, for the first time, the world around her was paying attention. She didn't cry. Not now. Not after decades of disappointment, of silent labor, of unrecognized sacrifices. The kind of pain that had once curled her stomach into knots had, over the years, become quiet strength. She had learned to carry it without it breaking her, like water wearing away stone, shaping her, refining her without acknowledgement. Her father's glass still trembled in his hand, the polished crystal shaking under the weight of truth he hadn't anticipated. The applause had faded. Conversation had stalled. Even the chandelier seemed to dim slightly, as if sensing the shift in power at the table. She picked up her purse slowly, deliberately, feeling the familiar weight of it against her hip. It was just a bag, but tonight it felt like armor. Her husband's hand rested lightly against hers, not as a shield but as a quiet support. She turned to face the room one last time. I spent my life trying to earn love, she said softly, but with a clarity that cut through the murmur of disbelief. Trying to be enough for people who could never see me. And tonight, I realized I don't need it from those who can't recognize me. Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't plead. It resonated, steady and calm, a sound that carried decades of endurance. There was no dramatic shouting. No violent confrontation. The power of her words was in their quiet certainty. She glanced at her father. He opened his mouth, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to demand respect, perhaps to reclaim authority, but the moment had passed. The control he thought he held had slipped through his fingers silently, irreversibly. She felt no anger toward him. Not anymore. The pain had transformed into something clearer, sharper, and stronger: freedom. Freedom from the need to be validated by someone who had never understood her. Freedom from the weight of expectations that had never been fair. Freedom from proving herself to a person who had never been able to see her worth. Her siblings shifted uncomfortably, faces turning pale under the weight of what had been revealed. Some looked ashamed. Some stared as if they were seeing her for the first time. They had laughed, celebrated, and admired the wrong people all their lives, while she had been quietly sustaining the family. Her husband gave her hand a gentle squeeze, a silent acknowledgement that she was not alone. She didn't need him to defend her, his presence, calm and steady, was enough. Together, they were a force they could not ignore, a truth they could not erase. She stepped away from the table. Each movement was slow, deliberate, graceful. She didn't rush. She didn't falter. Each step was a declaration: she was walking away with her dignity intact, her past acknowledged, and her future unbound. The room watched her go, suspended in stunned silence. No one applauded. No one called her back. She didn't look for approval. She didn't seek validation. The most satisfying reaction was the quiet recognition that her absence was now felt, her presence missed, her value undeniable. She and her husband exited, the door closing softly behind them, leaving behind a room full of broken pride and unspoken truths. Outside, the night air felt like a balm, cool and liberating against her skin. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel small, overlooked, or dismissed. Her revenge hadn't been loud or vengeful. It hadn't needed to be. It was the ultimate reclamation of self, dignity, freedom, and recognition earned on her terms. And as they walked together into the night, she realized that she didn't need anyone's approval. She was finally, irrevocably, enough.